This episode is brought to you by Allstate. Some people just know they could save hundreds on car insurance by checking Allstate first. Like, to check you have the tickets in your wallet first before you drive 2 hours to the big game. Seriously, you had one job. Now the closest you'll get to the 50-yard line is parking lot D. Yeah, checking first is smart. So check Allstate first for a quote that could save you hundreds. You're in good hands with Allstate. Savings vary. Terms apply. Allstate Fire and Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Northbrook, Illinois.
It feels like you can get your credit scores anywhere these days. Random websites, card statements, budgeting apps, heck, even your dog might bark out a few numbers. It's true. Credit Karma isn't the only place you can find them. But we actually do more with your scores to help you find your next financial opportunity. Like a more rewarding credit card, a game plan that helps you pay down debt faster, or a personal loan to help you save more on interest payments each month. Cha-ching! The possibilities are kinda endless. Download Intuit Credit Karma today to get started.
What's up, everyone? Welcome to the Big Ten Football Talk Podcast. I'm your host, Zach Guggenheim, and we are going to be talking about several topics here in the Big Ten. Make sure to like, follow, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, YouTube. Smash that like button, hit that subscribe button, get that algorithm going for some of the best Big Ten content out there. Really appreciate you guys listening in. We're going to start with some rumors circulating about Ryan Walters and Purdue. Purdue has obviously had a rough season, and it's seeming like it's going to be a little rougher for Ryan Walters. There has been a lot of smoke that Ryan Walters may be fired in the near future. As of recording, he has not been fired. And that part of the reason why he might be fired is because of some sort of misconduct. Now, I'm not going to get into the rumor mill and explain what the rumors are. I'm just going to say there's rumors of misconduct of personal nature. The reality is, if those rumors are true, sadly, because I don't think personal misconduct is a good thing and should be held accountable, but the reality is that's not even a question if he is remotely successful. The reason why there is any smoke of his firing at all has everything to do with his performance as the head coach for 2 seasons. If you look at what they've accomplished or not accomplished this season, obviously the record stands for itself. 1-6, 0-4 in the conference. And granted, they were not supposed to have a great year this year, but they were supposed to be at least competitive. They've been competitive in exactly one football game in the Big Ten this year, and that was against Illinois, and that was against an undermanned Illinois team. And really, they fought back in the second half. Good for them. Good for them. They've been abysmal in every other game sans Indiana State, which, quite honestly, who cares about Indiana State? So they have been awful. How bad have they been? Well, they've been outgained by 115 yards a game. Remember that Ryan Walters is supposed to be a defensive guy. They've allowed 450 yards a game. That's bad, right? That's really bad. Offensively, they're under 350 yards a game total. You look at how they've gotten beaten. I mean, it's bad. And remember, their only close loss has been to Illinois. I believe they scored 49 points in that game, which means 7 touchdowns. They've scored 17 touchdowns total. So they've played 7 games. 7 of their touchdowns came in one game. That means they've scored 10. I mean, it's just not good enough for a year 2 coach, especially against with a coach that you would have expected would have been improving. So this is obviously not good for them. And what this misconduct does is it gives Purdue potentially an opportunity to fire Ryan Walters with cause, which gets them around a buyout. It might help them negotiate a buyout to get that number down. Some of that is coming from the Boiler Express podcast, great Purdue podcast, Russ Johnson, DK. There's another guy on there too that I forgot. I'm going to pop these in because I realize it's going to be helpful to have these in. If you're listening on Spotify, I totally forgot to put my headphones in. My earbuds or my earbuds are in now, so now I can hear if anything's going off. Anyway, so Boiler Express was talking about this a little bit in our college huddle chat. So that the buyout can get negotiated a little bit over the bye week. That's why this impropriety matters if it's true. And again, I'm not going to say what it is. You can go on Twitter if you want to go down the rabbit hole. What I am going to say is that regardless of what it is, if it's true, it really does give credence for Purdue not only to part ways, but to part ways with cause. And it's unfortunate, but again, you want to talk about just the struggles of this team. Again, they've scored 17 touchdowns. Illinois, they did not score 7 touchdowns. They scored 6 touchdowns against Illinois. So 6 of their touchdowns came against Illinois. I believe against Nebraska, they scored 1. So that's 7. They scored 3 against Oregon State. And they scored 7 against Indiana State. There have been 4 games that they've played where they have not scored a single touchdown. Sorry, that is a lie. They also had 1 touchdown against Notre Dame. My math is off. But so they've scored touchdowns. Let's see. They've scored touchdowns in 5 of their games. They haven't scored touchdowns in 2 of them. But in, let's see, 3 of their games. Sorry, no, 2 of their games, they only scored 1 touchdown. So they've only scored they've had 3 games where they've scored more than 1 touchdown. That's not good. It's not good at all. And so you got to do something. The offense has been bad. The defense has been worse. Like aside from Indiana State, they have not allowed less than 28 points. And that was to a Nebraska team that's really struggled offensively. So again, if Ryan Walters is like 4-3 with a win over either Wisconsin or Notre Dame or Nebraska or Illinois, I don't think any of these rumors matter. The rumor is an opportunity for Purdue to move on and to do it without much penalty. So that's what's going on. Now, what do they do? Who do they go after? Again, Boiler Express threw out a name which I thought was a really smart hire would it be a really smart hire for Purdue, considering who they are as a program, which is they're pass happy, they're creative offensively. Like that's the type of coach you want. And his Boiler Express, I think it was probably Russ who mentioned this, said Ty Helton, the Western Kentucky head coach, who what do you know the Hilltoppers for? Offense, quick release, a lot of passing. Sounds like a really good hire to me. So I would sell out for him. That would be, I think, the number one choice. Apparently he was the number 2 behind Walters last time. So that seems to be maybe what's cooking up behind the scenes. So Purdue, Ryan Walters in some trouble, which makes sense. The second thing I want to address, Ohio State has had some concerns with Larry Johnson and Jim Knowles. There's been a lot of smoke. My partner on the Big Ten Huddle, JR, has mentioned several times that there has been some smoke behind the scenes between Larry Johnson and his defensive line and Jim Knowles and his scheme not meshing well. And that's been something going on maybe for the past couple years now. It's been something that's been that has been thought of because of the lack of pass rush, because of the lack of sacks. And some people were saying it and others were like, it's probably just hearsay. Interestingly enough, there's been a bit more play on this recently. So Nick Saban, he was on with Pat McAfee and was saying that Ohio State's defensive line and defense was antiquated as of late, and that the defensive line in particular, not able to get pressure, was just very pedestrian, very vanilla in the way they were playing. And then this past Tuesday, during the Ohio State press conference, Ryan Day was made available to the media. And they, Austin Ward, I believe, of the Podcast Network, asked a question about it. And he was asking about Larry Johnson and Jim Knowles, but he was also asking about the defense in general. And I thought there were some interesting points that Ryan Day said. First was he spent most of the bye week with the defense, which I think is huge. I think that's a big deal for Ryan Day to say that. And in saying that, he also expressed that he had talked both with Larry Johnson and Jim Knowles together to get them on the same page. Now, some fans are saying, why did it take this long to do that? But remember, this is why it was important that Ryan Day went and got Chip Kelly. Because Ryan Day was not able to have these types of conversations with his coaches because his mind was on everything else, on play calling, on play design, on quarterback development. Now that he's the CEO of this team, he can focus on what matters, which is, how do I get my staff to work together? I thought this is a huge step for Ryan Day. And listen, I've been critical of Ryan Day. People know that. I have said that, question him with his big game, struggles in big games. But I like the way Ryan Day is handling this. I know a lot of people won't acknowledge that because, they see the same problems over and over and over again. And I have too. I've said, what's different from this year from the past 3 years. And I think the difference is how he's handling the loss. He's focusing on what he can control, which is teamwork between coaches. He focused on the part of the side of the ball which really needed help after that game. And I think Ohio State's going to be better for it. I said this last week and I'll say it again. I think Ohio State is in a much better position than they have in years past. I do think the defense is going to be better. I do think the corners are going to be better. I think the pass rush is going to get better. I think Ryan Day taking the time to work with his staff and say, hey, we can't have this happen again. I think that's huge for this team because that's what they've needed from him for the past 3 years, was a CEO to come in and say, hey, you guys aren't doing your business well. Let's fix that. That's part of being a leader. That's part of being a coach. So anyone who's saying, well, Ryan Day should have solved this 3 years ago. Yes, he should have. You know why he didn't? Because he had too much on his plate. He had too much on his plate. So now he's doing the job. And I, for one, am excited to see the results of it. I would not be shocked if this week, and I said this on the Big Ten Huddle too, if they come out a little sluggish against Nebraska. I wouldn't be surprised there's a couple busts in coverage because Lathan Ransom supposedly is going to be out. I think they're probably installing some new things in that defense, which takes some time. So I wouldn't be surprised if Nair or Banks gets open loose downfield. I wouldn't be surprised if there's a bad run fit that leads to a big time play. I wouldn't be surprised if Nebraska controls the game a little bit in the first quarter, maybe in the first quarter and a half. I'm telling you, I think this is going to be a game where in the second half they turn it on and start to get ready for Penn State. I don't be shocked and don't be discouraged if Ohio State's a little sluggish coming into this game. I think it's going to happen. If it doesn't, then I'm actually more excited because it means, especially if they're more creative on defense and they cause turnovers, because they do that, I think it's showing and turning a new leaf for this team. So I'm excited to see what happens with Nebraska, Ohio State next week. I want to move to Wisconsin. Wisconsin, I early this season, I said, is Luke Fickell Scott Frost? I'd like to take back those words. Luke Fickell is doing a fine coaching job. 5-2, and he's turned things around quite a bit for the Badgers. And, you know, they are taking on Penn State this week at home. And I am very, very intrigued to see what happens in this game. Because I think they have reverted in a good way. They reverted to what we want to see out of Wisconsin in some ways. They are going back to more of a power run game. Now, they're still in shotgun. They're still doing some air raid stuff philosophically. But in terms of play calling, 60% run to 40% pass. Tyree Walker has been dynamite. And they have dominated games. I think that's the most exciting thing about this team right now is they are dominating. They're dominating teams like you expect them to. And I'm excited to see what continues to happen. Tyree Walker, by the way, has been playing really, really good football. Like as their second running back. Ches Malusi out right now. But this has been the past few games for him. So he came in, started having more carries against USC. Well, he's had steady carries, but first couple games, 15 carries, 66 yards, 11 carries, 26 yards. That was Western Michigan and Alabama. Those are the first two games he played. He did not play in the second game. I'm forgetting who they played in week 2. But against Alabama, 11 carries, 26 yards, not very good. USC, 12 carries, 55 yards. Okay, a little bit better. Purdue, 19 carries, 94 yards. Against Rutgers, 24 carries, 198 yards. Against Northwestern, 23 carries, 126 yards. In the past 4 games, he has scored 8 touchdowns. He is really starting to find rhythm in this running game. I think the offensive line is starting to improve in the running game. I think the pass protection for Braden Locke has really started to be a difference maker in this offense. And so I'm excited to see what they do against a Penn State team who I think got a little surprised by some of the athleticism by USC, as well as some of the physicality by USC. And remember, USC is not super physical. But Woody Marks ran for over 100 yards on him on Penn State. They had another 75-yard run by, I think, a wide receiver in that game. They ran the ball pretty well against Penn State. And I am concerned about Penn State. On the huddle, I said this on my sheet, I wrote down Penn State wins the game. In my gut, I think Penn State loses. On the road, the week before Ohio State, Ohio State's the game that I'm sure, like they're laser focused on that one. There have been a lot of games in the past where Penn State has not been focused on the team in front of them the week before Ohio State under James Franklin. So I could see a real upset, particularly with how Wisconsin has been playing as of late. Wisconsin has been they've thrown the ball well, they've run the ball well, their defense is playing lights out. And just to give you a sense of what Wisconsin has done, right? Ever since the USC loss and the bye week, 52-6 against Purdue, 42-7 against Rutgers, 23-3 against Northwestern. Now, none of those offenses scare you, right? Purdue doesn't scare you. Rutgers doesn't scare you. Northwestern doesn't scare you. That being said, they're one of two teams to hold Purdue to 0 touchdowns. The other one being Oregon. They are, I believe, they're one of two teams that held Rutgers to a single touchdown. The other being Nebraska. And I believe they held Northwestern to their lowest offensive output. So the defense is getting it done. And unlike USC and Alabama, I don't think Penn State has the receiving room to really exploit a back end who has not lived up to expectations. I would say, like, I think Hunter Wohler is good. I think Ricardo Hallman is good, but they haven't been as good as I thought they'd be. Now, here's the one X factor. My guy, Tyler Warren, he could go off. I think Penn State's receivers are good enough that they can make plays down the field. I am just concerned they're not going to be able to do it consistently. So I think Wisconsin has a really good shot to get Penn State at home. And then this is their schedule the rest of the way. At Iowa, Oregon at home, at Nebraska, and Minnesota at home. I'm not saying this is going to happen. So before people kill me on this, just realize I'm not saying it's going to happen. If they beat Penn State at home, you're looking at a potential dark horse playoff run for Wisconsin, because they have to go on the road at Iowa, but I think they're a better team right now than Iowa. I think they're better than everybody else on their schedule after Penn State, except Oregon. And they are getting Oregon at home, and Oregon will have traveled 3 out of the past 4 weeks. Remember, preseason, I actually picked Wisconsin to beat Oregon. And I'm not sure how I feel about that still. But I don't think it's a long shot to see Wisconsin beat Penn State and Oregon. Not with the fact that they're both at Camp Randall. Now, I wouldn't pick Oregon. I think Oregon's looked actually much better than I expected. Oregon's playing really well right now. So, but I'm just saying Wisconsin has turned the corner. And I think you're looking at a minimum of 7 wins. I think you could easily say at least 8, maybe 9 or 10. I would pick them to go 9-3 at this point, because I think they get Penn State this weekend, and I think they get Iowa, Nebraska, and Minnesota. So I think Luke Fickell's doing a heck of a job, heck of a turnaround after we killed him, earlier in the season. So great job making adjustments. Great job in all of that. In all seriousness, it has been a fun team to watch over the past few weeks. And it's not been fun for the teams they've played. I mean, that margin of victory, 46, 35, and 20, they're beating people up right now. And that's really good to see for a Wisconsin team that lacked identity for the first 4 weeks of the season. Speaking of teams that are beating people up, Indiana, man. Indiana is so good. They're so good. 7-0. Listen, you can't take Nebraska and say, well, Nebraska's not very good. I don't think Nebraska played very well, but Indiana is legit. We keep saying it on this show, but they are legit. Now, here's the problem. Indiana is going to be down their starting quarterback, Curtis Rourke. In comes Taven Jackson. Can Taven Jackson keep this up? And I'll just tell you, I think so. I think they can keep it up. I think they are. I think they're better on defense than people give them credit for. And here's the thing that's really stood out to me over the past several weeks. Their running backs. Their running game has taken over. So if you look at their running game, Ellison had 9 carries for 105 yards and 2 touchdowns against a pretty good Nebraska defense. 105 yards. They had 215 yards rushing total. And if you take out the 3 kneel downs for 9 yards, it's 30 carries for 224. So they averaged about 7.5 yards a carry if you take the kneel downs out of it. That's insane. 7.5 yards a carry against a good Nebraska defense. Now you go to Northwestern, they scored 41 points in that game. And if you look at, again, the running game for them, again, it wasn't nearly as good. 149 yards on 35 carries, but again, 3 kneel downs. You take that out of the equation, it's 32 carries for 158 yards, essentially 5 yards a carry. Ellison averaged a hair under 5 yards a carry. Lawton averaged 5.2 yards per carry. Kalen Black, 6.6 yards per carry. That's pretty good. Against the Northwestern defense, that's not bad. Maryland, against Maryland, again, the running game was good. It was very good. You look at their backs, they had 150 yards. And I think the thing that's impressive is you go from Maryland to now, their rushing average per attempt has been getting higher and higher. And the degree of difficulty has been getting harder, right? Like Northwestern and Nebraska are better defenses than Maryland. So why do I say that? They go in against a Washington team that I don't think has done a great job against the run. They certainly didn't do a good job against Caleb Johnson. And now you're throwing in a dual threat quarterback in Taven Jackson. So I think Indiana's going to run the ball a lot. I think Taven Jackson's better than people give him credit for. Remember, he has not had a lot of great coaching before this. He had Tom Allen, who is a great defensive mind, not a good head coach. But now you got someone who knows how to coach quarterbacks. You've got a dual threat guy with a blossoming running game against a team that struggles to stop the run. And I think this is a good matchup for Indiana. I have Indiana winning this game by double digits. Now, I think the danger here is you do have a new quarterback with Taven Jackson starting. And so what happens if Washington forces you in a shootout? Because they have the horses for it. Regardless of their last game against Iowa, they did not play well. They were undisciplined. My one concern for this game for Indiana is that I don't think they faced an offense with quite the firepower that Washington has. And with all due respect to Maryland, these are the best receivers, the best receiver tandem and running back combination and quarterback combo that they've seen. Like those four positions are better than what they saw at Maryland. And remember, Maryland put up 28 points. Now, granted, some of that was because of turnovers by Rourke, but they've allowed 28. They allowed 28 points to Maryland. They allowed 24 to Northwestern. So I would not be shocked if Indiana allows 28 points. But I think Indiana is going to score in the 30s or 40s. So I think it's a double-digit win for Indiana. I think they get to 8-0. Listen, if that happens, even if they lose this game, they need to extend Curt Cignetti now. Like, I wouldn't even say now. I'd say by yesterday. They need to give him a contract extension. They've got to find a way to lock him up and not lose him to Auburn or Florida. And for anyone who's sitting there's like, but don't you remember Mel Tucker? Completely different story. First of all, Mel Tucker, like he got them to a really good record in 2021. Also, Michigan State has had better years, right? Mark D'Antonio is one of the best coaches in Michigan State history. And he was having 10, 11 win seasons all the time. He got them to the Rose Bowl, got them to number 3 in the country, won the Big Ten, beat Ohio State in a Big Ten championship game, right? Beat Ohio State en route to another Big Ten championship game. So what Mel Tucker did was great in 2021. People forget that well, let's not forget that while with all of Mel Tucker's issues, he did a great job in 2021. But Michigan State had been there before. Indiana rarely hits 7 wins in a season. In fact, and they're 7-0, mind you. If you want to go back in history, the last time they had over seven wins or more was 2019. Before that, they were 7-6 in 2007. And then before that, you have to go all the way back to 1993. They were 8-4. And before that, 91. So since 1990, they have had 7 wins or more 1, 2, 3, 4 times, not including this year. So in the past 34 years, it's happened 4 times. The last time they were ranked this high in the AP poll, not including COVID. We're not including COVID in this. The last time they were ranked 13th at any point in the polls, 1987. That's when Bill Mallory was the coach. This is a big deal. By the way, the last few years under Tom Allen, 5-7, 5-7, 8-5, 6-2, right? So good years. 2021, 2-10, 4-8, 3-9. And this man started 7-0, Curt Cignetti. For anybody who's saying they haven't played anybody, listen. Can we just be real? They have never been 7-0 like this. I mean, they're blowing teams out. Their smallest margin of victory is 14 against Maryland. And that game, it was a 21-point game until late in the fourth. They're just decimating people. I don't care how bad the opponents are. Like, they're one of 3 undefeated teams in the Big Ten still. And I can tell you right now, I don't know, like, if Indiana and Penn State played today, I think I'm picking Indiana. I think if Indiana and Ohio State played today, I'm probably picking Ohio State, but I don't feel good about it. Like, they're for real. If you slapped on the Penn State logo or the Ohio State logo or an SEC logo of any kind, Indiana is at least a top 10 team, if not a top 5 team. But because it's Indiana, they're still 13th, which I think is an abomination by the pollsters, by the way. This team's legit. I keep saying it. The line play is better than people expected. The receiver room is awesome. The running backs are underrated. The defense is underrated. The quarterback room is good, right? Curtis Rourke might be the best quarterback in the conference. Like, this is a really good football team. And I think if they don't want to lose that, you better pony up the money to keep Cignetti and extend his contract yesterday. Not tomorrow, not the end of the season. Now, as soon as you can. Because what this man is doing in Bloomington is insane. And like, you look at the rest of the schedule, Washington, they're favored. Michigan State, they'll be favored. Michigan, they're favored. Purdue, they're favored. The only team they're not going to be favored against down the stretch, Ohio State. And I'm not sure that's going to be more than a 7-point line. This is what Cignetti has done is remarkable. They were 3-9 a year ago. That they've won 9. I mean, they're on pace to have more wins than the past 3 years combined. And Curt Cignetti did a great job in the transfer portal. But remember, he has wrangled up the group of 5 all-stars. The key word there is group of 5. Like, these are guys that have excelled at a lower level of football and are now excelling in one of the premier conferences in the sport. They are, what he's done is remarkable. Extend him, Hoosiers. We want to see Cignetti for the next several years. Speaking of coaches, I'm going to end the show with a couple more coaching thoughts. There's a lot of consternation with Greg Schiano right now. And I understand it because hopes for the season were high. We had Larry Crane on from Night Watch a couple weeks ago on the Big Ten Huddle, and we were talking about kind of the way the season has broke for Rutgers with the injuries. And it has not been a good look, right? It has not been good for them. It is not the way that they've kind of just cratered. Like, it's not just that they've had injuries, but it seems like all the heart and soul has been taken away from Rutgers. And it's been disappointing because if you look at the schedule, they lost to UCLA, which I think UCLA is starting to look a bit better. But you expected Rutgers to beat UCLA at home. Now they got to go on the road to USC. Then their last 4 games, Minnesota at home, at Maryland, Illinois at home, at Michigan State. Like, I don't know if they get a single win. Like, I don't know if there's a win left on their schedule, which is terrifying because, we were talking about 7 wins, 8 wins, heck, 10 wins maybe. Certainly a bowl game. And because of that, because of all the experience, because of the seniors coming back, and now all of a sudden, it seems like all those hopes are lost. People are starting to call for Greg Schiano's job. And they're saying, hey, maybe this guy maybe he isn't the guy to get us over the hump. There's been decommitments. It seems like all the momentum has been sucked out of the program. How do I talk about this? Some people are saying Schiano should be fired. I just want to remind you that I think you have to remember the context of Schiano and the context of what he's done for this program and also where Rutgers is. Remember Chris Ash? We don't want to go back to Chris Ash, right? Don't do that. He had 8 wins in total in his 4 years at Rutgers. He had eight wins total. And if you count Nunzio Campanile, or however you say his name, that 9 wins in his 4 years, in the 4 years that he was associated with the program, because Nunzio got one as an interim. So to be fair to him, I'll say 9 wins. Greg Schiano has had 3 wins in 2020, 5 wins in 2021, 4 wins in 2022, 7 wins in 2023. So in Greg Schiano's 4 years, he's had 19 wins, more than double Chris Ash. I think you gotta recognize who Schiano is. And before you say, well, Schiano is good at building a foundation, but he can't get us over the hump. That might be true, but the reality is we found out how fragile the foundation has been at Rutgers, which is hard. It's a hard place to get over the hump. Why was there all that momentum this offseason? There was all that momentum because you had all these guys coming back. Well, what happened? Teray got hurt. Powell's been off and on, right? You had Longerbeam out. Sam Brown is out for the season. You've had a lot of injuries on the defensive line. I think I saw at one point on the rivals board for Rutgers that there were 5 NFL caliber players out. And listen, I don't care if you're Ohio State or Penn State or any, like, that's going to derail your. Now, I don't think Greg Schiano has handled it well. I think he seems uptight. I think he seems like, he seems a bit defeated. But listen, he's coming off one of the best seasons of Rutgers history. And this is where I say to Rutgers fans, remember who you are. Which I know you don't want to. I know you want to be up here, but remember who you are. You have always been a lower level, a lower tier team, and you are already trying to punch up in a conference that just got a whole heck of a lot better. And I know that the schedule set up well, but it was still always going to be difficult. And we were never talking about surefire wins, right? When we talked about Washington, we talked about maybe you'll win. When we talked about Virginia Tech, we talked about maybe you'll win. And like we like your chances, but it's not a gimme, right? It's not a gimme. And when we looked at the schedule back preseason, I had them going 8-4. And I had them losing to Virginia Tech, Nebraska, and Wisconsin. They beat Virginia Tech, they lost to UCLA. But like here's part of what's changed. I think Minnesota looks a little better. And I think Rutgers has kind of lost some drive. I think Maryland, I think they're hot and cold, right? So I don't know what you're going to get with them. Illinois is a lot better than I expected. Michigan State is better than I expected. So what I thought was an easy schedule, for one, it was an easier schedule, but all those wins that I was giving Rutgers was more on the sure thing that I thought Rutgers was, but I still had some trepidation picking those games. And now you're telling me that half their defense has been hurt most of the year. Now, I know not all of them are out for the season, but you got to remember who you are. Like you are going to win because Schiano can punch upward. But the depth, as much as I liked that they had some depth, their depth isn't Ohio State or Penn State or Oregon level. And they've gotten hit by the injury bug worse than anybody in the conference. Right? And we've seen it with Michigan, right? Michigan lost a lot of people. You know who they're really struggling too? They're 4-3 too. And I'm not sure how many wins are left on their schedule. And they have premium players on that team. Right? No offense, you don't have a Mason Graham. You don't have a Will Johnson. Will Johnson, I'm not sure how many more games he's going to play. But you don't have a Will Johnson. You don't have a Kenneth Grant. You don't have a Colston Loveland. Like, those guys are first-round picks. Rutgers has NFL guys. You don't have premier players. So here's my word of caution. Don't ditch the guy who got you to the dance yet. Everything's not over. There was always going to be a little concern about Kaliakmanis. But listen, you're starting to have momentum. You're starting to have momentum in this sense of getting better recruits, of getting better in the transfer portal, right? Kaliakmanis is an improvement in the passing game. If you start to show recruits that you can coach an offense and have a more legitimate passing attack, the better quarterbacks will come. The better receivers will come, right? You've got freshmen on this team that are contributing. Develop those guys. Like, don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. Don't ditch the guy who got you here. Right? If in 3 years you're not back to a bowl game, then maybe ditch him. But listen, just understand, this is not the Big East anymore. Right? This is not the Big East. You're not going to go 11-2, have 8 wins, 9 wins almost every year. Right? That's not going to happen. Not in the Big Ten. There's too many good teams in this league. Don't give up on him. Things have gone sideways on him. And I think it's hard when your season was right in front of you and then injury after injury after injury kills you. It's hard to recover from that emotionally. And so does Greg Schiano deserve a lot of criticism? Absolutely. That is not at all what I'm saying, that he doesn't deserve criticism. He absolutely deserves criticism. He doesn't deserve any of the firing talk. Like, remember what he's done for you. He's going to get it done. And if he doesn't in the next 3 years, then cut him loose. But remember who you are. You're not a top tier team. You don't have a top tier pedigree. And that's not meant to be disrespectful. I'm just telling you, don't ditch him because he failed expectations this year. Just remember, he surpassed expectations a year ago. So don't do something. This is not Ryan Walters. It's not. All right. Let me go from one coach that should not be on the hot seat at all to a coach that absolutely should be on the hot seat. And that's Lincoln Riley. This will be the last thing we talk about. Lincoln Riley. I've said it for years. Everybody wanted to compare Lincoln Riley to Ryan Day. They ain't the same. Anybody who says, well, if Lincoln Riley were at Ohio State, yada, yada, I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear it. Lincoln Riley, when you're at a press conference and someone asks you, what do you got to do differently at the end of games? He's like, I have no idea. That screams trouble. It screams trouble. Now, I still don't think he's Clay Helton 2.0. Clay Helton, you have to remember, he was a coach that got away with being in a mediocre conference for a long time and got away with mediocre results. So just remember, Clay Helton, he took over in 2015, went 5-4, then had 2 10-win seasons. He won a Rose Bowl, and then he lost a Cotton Bowl. But in both years, finished in the top 10 of at least one poll. Right? And he won a conference championship. So good for him. 5-7, 8-5, 5-1. And the 5-1 season was the COVID year. So that doesn't really count. 2021, they go 1-1. They lose, I believe, they lose to Stanford, and he's fired after that game. And they end up 4-8. Now, who knows what happens if they keep Clay Helton on after that loss. But the reality is they lost to an abysmal Stanford team. So USC, under Clay Helton was very, very average. And they were up and down, up and down, up and down. So, right? Like Clay Helton was not very good. Okay, what about Lincoln Riley? Lincoln Riley at USC only started out 11-3, and that was after a terrible season. And Lincoln Riley brought in a lot of his own guys. He brought in Jordan Addison. He brought in Caleb Williams. They go 11-3. They lose in the Pac-12 championship game. And then a year after that, they go 8-5 in a decent Pac-12 in their final year. And then they come over to the Big Ten, and they are 3-4, and their losses are looking worse and worse, right? Now they lose to Penn State. That's not a bad loss. They lose to Michigan. It's at Michigan. They lose to Minnesota. It's at Minnesota. Maryland, I give no pass to because it's Maryland, and they just blew that game, right? Maryland's not a good team, and I don't care that they traveled. But here's what I will say. One, I never expected them to have a great year this year. I had them 8-4, so certainly better than 3-4 at this point. But the reality was this was never going to be a roster that made you think that they were going to be great. And the schedule was worse. Now, I think they're still a bowl team this year. Like, I think they beat Rutgers. I think they can get Washington on the road.
Oh, it's such a clutch off-season pickup, Dave.
I was worried we'd bring back the same team.
I meant those blackout motorized shades.
Blinds.com made it crazy affordable to replace our old blinds.
Hard to install?
No, it's easy. I installed these and then got some for my mom. She talked to a design consultant for free and scheduled a professional measure and install.
Hall of Fame son.
They're the #1 online retailer of custom window coverings in the world.
Blinds.com is the GOAT.
Shop Blinds.com right now and get up to 45% off select styles. Rules and restrictions may apply.
Whether you're ordering wings for the game, whipping up a 7-layer dip, or ordering pizza, there's something about football that makes you want to eat. And this football season, Uber Eats has the best deals on game day food. No matter what you're craving, from 2-for-1 pizza to buy one, get one wings, Uber Eats will be dropping new deals each week, all season long. Uber Eats, official on-demand delivery partner of the NFL. Order now. Terms and conditions apply. See app for details.
I still am probably going to pick Nebraska because I'm going to stick to my guns on that. I was saying all year that'd be the upset of the year. Well, I don't know if it's the upset of the year anymore. I'm not even sure it's going to be an upset, but I think Nebraska has struggled. So like, I think they can go 4-0 in the next 4 games, and then they play Notre Dame, and who knows what's going to happen with Notre Dame. But here's what I would say. Anyone who's comparing Lincoln Riley to Clay Helton, I understand it. I understand that people want to compare, and especially when somebody is down. I'll say this. He was dominant in the Big 12. And that means something. Now, I don't think the Big 12 is great, but he still had to deal with Texas, and Texas was down. I get that. But they won 4 straight Big 12 titles. They were 9-2 in the COVID year. Otherwise, he would have had 5 consecutive 10-win seasons. He had 4 straight years where he's ranked in the top 7 of the polls. I just don't think you can. I don't think you can throw that out. And I think you got to let coaches who have that type of resume, you got to let them work it out a bit. Now, does that mean that I think he shouldn't be on the hot seat? No. I think he absolutely should be on the hot seat. But I don't think it should be melting, and barring a complete collapse where they go 3-9. Like, I do not think he should at all get axed this year. Now, next year, if it's the same thing, then I think you have that conversation. But, that's going to be a tough schedule. Again, you're talking about a new world where you have a tough game legitimately almost every single week. And so just, again, next season, I'm pulling up the schedule now, and, they're out of conference is a little bit more manageable, right? It's Missouri State, Georgia Southern. It's a rematch with Clay Helton. Hey. And then at Notre Dame. But they got to go to Illinois, and Illinois has been pretty good this year. They got to go to Nebraska. That's not going to be a cakewalk with year 3 of Matt Rule. They got to go to Autzen-ish. They got to go to Purdue. They're going to have a new coach. Who knows what that's going to be like? They're going to play Iowa at home, Michigan at home, Michigan State at home, Northwestern at home, and UCLA at home. Iowa is always going to be tough regardless. And their type of play is going to be tough along the trenches. Who knows what Michigan's going to be in a year? They might actually be one of the weaker teams they play next year. Michigan State is ascending. I think Northwestern is a wild card, and UCLA is a wild card because they have talent and they can recruit LA. And I think Deshaun Foster, while I don't think he's the greatest X's and O's coach, I think he's committed to recruiting LA and getting NIL up and running there. And so I think next year like, I think you have enough games next year where you're like, all right, if you don't go 8-4, 9-3 minimum, and you're not in the playoff conversation by the end of the season, I think you can then talk about pulling the plug. But I don't think you do it yet because he has the cachet, he has the recruiting chops, and I just don't think you want to get rid of him, especially with Danton Lynn. Like, there have been improvements. It's just they're playing a lot of teams that have leveled up. And we talked about that in preseason, right? Minnesota, their roster is better. Like, it's a much better roster. Like, they beat Wisconsin. We were just talking about how Wisconsin has gotten a lot better the past few weeks. Right? Penn State is a team that, like, I have them losing this week, but I think, I don't know. I think Penn State's a pretty good team. I think they're a playoff team. So I just think you have to remember they're not playing. Their schedule's different. And if you go back to 2021, who did Lincoln Riley beat? He didn't have Oregon or Washington on the schedule. You know what? One of the reasons why they did worse last year, because Washington and Oregon were on the schedule, a playoff team and an almost playoff team. They didn't have them on the schedule in 2021. So you got to remember that there's context here. I don't think you get rid of Lincoln Riley yet. I think we're seeing what was left at USC. And now I think Lincoln Riley is going to have to adjust how he recruits the trenches, which I think is what we've been saying all along. And I know people will say he's had 3 years to do it. I get that. But now he's in a conference where he has to adjust that expectation further. And everybody in the Pac-12, all the Pac-12 teams that have come over, with the exception of Oregon, have struggled with that. Washington, UCLA, and USC all have struggled. So I think you got to give him at least a little bit. I think you got to give him at least another year. But I think his seat needs to be a lot hotter than Greg Schiano's. Let me give you my quick scores for this week, and then I will let you guys go. The Friday night game is Rutgers at USC. I have USC winning 35-24. The following day on Saturday, big noon kickoff, Nebraska goes to Ohio State. I've got Nebraska losing 17, Ohio State scoring 45. I think it's going to be close in the first half. Indiana hosts Washington. I've got Indiana beating Washington by 17, 45-28. I think it's high scoring. I think it's going to have to be for Indiana. Oregon, number 1 team in the country, taking on number 20 Illinois. Illinois fans are going to rejoice because I'm picking against you. But also, I honestly don't think there's much of a pathway for Illinois to win. Before Illinois fans get on me, I know Illinois can do a lot of things that could frustrate Oregon. Their red zone defense is good. Their special teams is good. They have good receivers. I think the line play is going to be the difference in this game. And I just don't think their offensive line can hold up against what I think is just a dominant personnel in that front seven with Derek Harmon and with Uiagalelei at the linebacker spot. Jordan Birch probably not playing. I don't think it's going to matter. I think it's going to be rough. That's not to say that I don't think Illinois is good. I just think Oregon's the best team in the country right now. Maryland, Minnesota. I have Maryland. I have Minnesota winning 28-20. I think the secondary really limits Maryland, and I think Minnesota gets it done. I think they get a little bit more traction in the running game. Michigan State, I think, upsets Michigan, although I know it's an upset by Vegas, but I think the way they're playing right now, I think Michigan State should be the favorite. I've got them winning 28-17. And I think in the game of the night, I think Wisconsin upsets number 3 Penn State at Camp Randall. If this game were on a neutral field or in Happy Valley, I'd pick Penn State. But because it's in Camp Randall, and it's a night game, Wisconsin 24, Penn State 20. So that'll do it for this edition of the Big Ten Football Talk podcast. Make sure you like, subscribe, leave a review on Apple Podcasts, leave a comment on Spotify, and also leave a review there. Please like and subscribe on YouTube as well. Appreciate you all. Take care. God bless.